to Mount Pleasant Up Close. My name's Jeff Landy. I'm the Borough Manager, and as always, my co-host.
Jerry Lucia, Mayor of Mount Pleasant.
You know, Jerry, most of the time I talk about the locations we're at and the settings we're at and the new places we go to, but this is really comfortable here.
This is a very comfortable home.
You're talking about sitting in a living room. I mean, you can't beat that, Jerry.
Yeah, and I'll tell you what, Jeff, when we talked about Claudia being on our show many a time, she was on once before when we talked about the Steelers.
The Steelers.
And her memory was
Sharp.
right on sharp.
Sharp.
And yesterday I tested her, or was it 2 days ago?
2 days.
We had a test, me and Claudia, and she was so good. So good. I mean, her memory is so great, and the story she tells is just so refreshing to remember back those years.
Yeah, well, we've done almost 300 shows, and there's a lot of good guests, but I always think that the guests that are just the regular citizens who have stories about Mount Pleasant are some of the most interesting stories. Because
and it's just our listeners from Mount Pleasant especially, it brings back to them memories. Yes,
right.
It does.
Yes, it does. Well, I'll let you introduce Claudia like you did the last time.
Okay, well, Claudia Stahl is our guest today. And Claudia has lived in this house probably close to 100 years. Am I correct, Claudia?
The house is 100 years old, and Mother built it in 1923. And I was 5 years old when we came to town, yes, and I'm 97 now.
And you've lived here the whole time?
I've lived here the whole time.
Now that's remarkable.
That is
remarkable.
Beautiful home though, and I'm telling you, this houses back then were built very good, weren't they?
They sure were.
And I have 2 bedrooms upstairs, 2 bedrooms downstairs, a basement downstairs.
And tell me and tell our audience, how did it come about that Mother built this home?
That Mother built this home. Well, my daddy died when I was 3 years old. That is his picture up there. He was 38. He had fallen and hit his head, and it caused his death. And I was 3. My sister was 4 and a half. My brother was not born yet. Mother was 4 months pregnant with my brother when Daddy died. And my uncle lived across the street, John Sowers, and he heard that Mount Pleasant was going to hire a truant officer, which they had never had before. And so Uncle John went to a couple of the school board members and asked them if they would consider Mother, or a young widow with 3 children. And they said, well, she would have to be a resident of Mount Pleasant. Well, she immediately called the contractors in Bridgeport, and they came up. This lot was empty. Mother had the house started in July, and excuse me, I want to get back onto the track now. And so Mother had the house built, and the gentleman on the school director said that she had to be a resident of Mount Pleasant before she would be considered. So when Mother heard this from Uncle John, she, as I said, went through with having bought the lot and had the house built. And the house was finished in July, and Mother was hired as the first truant officer in Mount
Pleasant School District.
And so I have lived here ever since, and I was 5 years old when we came to town, and this has been my home.
Yeah, lovely home, lovely home. Claudia, you were telling me a story when you were in high school, and the Grant Company,
W.T. Grant store.
W.T. Grant store. Everybody would remember the Grant store that was in Mount
It was
Pleasant.
like a 5 and 10 almost, wasn't
Yes,
it?
Yeah.
where
A
right,
department store.
right
of 5 and-
beside. Yes,
That's
right.
where Joe's Pools is at now.
Uh,
Was that the?
no, I think it was above there, wasn't it?
It was right below the meat market.
Yeah.
Coast Belts Meat Market. There was a Candyland, the meat market, and then the Grant store.
It's actually where
And-
Denise is.
Okay.
Yeah.
Where Stock Up Graphics is at.
And Mr. Hatch was the manager.
Uh-huh.
And he called Mr. Haberlin, the school superintendent, and asked him to send down 4 honest young ladies that he wanted to train for clerks. And my sister and I were two of the 4 young ladies that were sent down. And of course, we began our Saturday evening work at Grant's. And would you believe how much we were paid for our Saturday evening, 3 hours of work? 58 cents
50 for the whole evening.
for the whole evening.
58 cents.
58 cents for
58
3
cents.
hours of work. Yes.
You're overpaid, Jeff.
So, so that would be almost. That'd be a little less than 20 cents an hour.
Yes, it would be.
Mm-hmm.
And what year was that?
1930, I would say 34, because I graduated in 36.
Well, was that because of maybe the Depression at the time? Was it Depression?
No, Mount Pleasant seemed to be a very active little community at that time. Come Saturday evenings, you couldn't find a place to park.
Oh,
Everything was
I can
absolutely...
remember in the 50s when
Yes.
it was like that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the streets just, they had police officers crossing people.
Oh, yes.
Oh,
yes,
is that right?
Yes,
Mhm.
uh-huh.
And
Joe White was our police officer then, and he had a horse that he traveled around town in. But he was our chief of police then, Joseph White.
Well, Claudia, now, you were there at Grant's as a sales clerk, right?
Yes,
And then you graduated from high school.
that is correct.
And what did Grant's want you to do then?
Well, we were several men came once a year and checked the store out to see that everything was running normally and that the counters were all in good shape and so forth and so on. Is this a story you want me to tell?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so the gentleman said to me that they would like me to come to New York, that they would like to put me through the paces of everything that would be considered necessary for me to be a member of their working force. And I said, well, I'm sorry, I would have to be of age. And I said, I'm just 18 right now, and I would have to be 21 before I would be able to go. But I thanked them very much for the opportunity. And then it was a couple years later that I was notified from Freed's department store that they would like to have me come up and be one of their clerks. So I left Grant's after 8 years, and I went up to Freed's department store, which is now the Standard Bank.
Yes, right
Okay.
on the corner.
And I worked there, and I liked it very much. It was a ladies' dress shop, and I was there 7 or 8 years, and I received a call, and a gentleman came down to see me, and he was one of our doctors in town, and he said a friend of his was the county treasurer, Smith McKee Jr., at the courthouse, and he would like me to, wanted to know if I would like to have a position there. And I said, well, yes, it sounded very interesting. So I left Freed's, and I had an interview with Mr. McKee, and I was hired. He asked if I could have come immediately in October, and I said, well, no, my husband and I were going to take his mother and father and my mother and I up to New England on a nice little tour vacation. So Mr. McKee said, well, how about November? So I started work at the courthouse in November. And the county treasurer at that time could only serve one term. They were not permitted to have a successive term.
Successive terms.
So after Mr. McKee left, well, first of all, I went for my interview, and he had wanted me to start immediately, and I couldn't start immediately, and I started in November. And of course, they cannot succeed themselves. They can only have a 4-year term. Well, when he left, John Peck was our next county treasurer, and he was a Democrat. And he kept me. I was a Republican. And so this was in November when he took office. And in January, he came to me and he said, Claudia, I'm receiving a lot of flack from the Democratic Committee in Westmoreland County for having a Republican working in my office. So he said, I would like for you to reconsider and tell me that you're going to stay. And he said, but I'll tell you, he said, you can vote however you want to. I thought that was very nice. And I said, fine. I said, that's exactly what I'll do. And of course, I was with him for 4 years.
Now, how old were you at this time, Claudia?
Well, I graduated from high school at 17 and a half. And I had 8 years at Grant.
So you're 25 and a half.
And then I went up to Freed's, and I had 8 years at Freed's.
Okay, so you're 33 and a half.
So then I went to the courthouse.
Okay, so you were in your middle 30s.
Yes, I was in my middle 30s.
Okay.
And what was ironic about this, I had not been put in an application for work anywhere. These were all positions that were offered to me. And so after I finished with Mr. Peck, I was not unemployed but a couple of months when I was approached by another gentleman in Mount Pleasant and asked if I knew Smith McKee Jr., the county treasurer's office, county treasurer. And I said no. Now let's see, I'm getting a little ahead of my story. I mean, no, I've already had my job. Yes. So this, I was contacted then after I was at the courthouse. I was here, and I received a call from the assistant principal of the high school asking me if I would like to go to work for the school district. And I said, well, as long as it's not any Saturday work, yes, I would come to work for them. So I went to work for them. However, I'll go back a bit. When Mr. Peck went from county treasurer to our
Sheriff's office.
Sheriff, he asked me if I would like to continue working at the courthouse, that he would have a job for me with one of the judges. And I told him, no, my husband had a good job and I would just leave that for somebody else. So that's exactly how that happened. And then Mr. Dillon called me and asked me to come and work for the school district. And I spent 18 years at the school district, and then I retired.
But you never put an application in for a
I never
job.
put an application in
That's
for
just
any
something
job.
today
No.
you would never hear of. And we were going back to when you were a Republican working in the office of a Democrat. That happened a lot with people that had jobs on the turnpike or for the county or for the state in general. Whenever you were a party member of the opposite party of the person elected, normally you switch parties. It was just a common thing.
Yeah, you kept your job.
You
but
kept your
switched,
job,
you switched the parties.
but to make it more comfortable for the person
That's
in
right.
office.
That's right.
That was a common thing.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, it's true today a little bit. Not as maybe as common, but it's
Yeah.
true today a little bit that
Mhm.
you switch.
Just to keep peace and
Yeah.
relationship. Yeah, it
Yeah.
happens. But Claudia, you worked a great number of jobs there.
I had nice positions, yes, I did.
You were happy probably
Oh, I was-
knowing you as long as I've known
I
you.
was happy with all my work and
Right,
with all my
right.
associates. It just was wonderful.
Now I'm going to ask you, Jeff. You know we have a lot of clubs in town. Not the clubs that you go drinking, but the social
Social
clubs.
Would
clubs.
you
Yes.
go out onto the table and bring those papers that are out there on the corner of the table?
Okay.
This girl does not sit at home.
These are my organizations of where I had work.
Oh my gosh, my gosh. Jeff, why don't you just read down the list so our listeners will know?
Yes, read.
She was in the Scottsdale chapter of the Eastern Star, Braddock Trail chapter of Daughters of the American Revolution, chapter order of Amaranth,
Amaranth.
Amaranth. Mount Pleasant Women's Club, Mount Pleasant Music Club, Business and Professional Women's Club.
And it was only here for about 6 months, and then it
It went away.
Frick Hospital Aid Society, Mount Pleasant Girls Band. Mount Pleasant Girls Band.
Oh yes, we had a girls' band actually.
We should revisit that, Claudia.
Yeah.
The United Methodist Church of Mount Pleasant. Multiple churches, offices held. Church administration committee offices, church choirs, Sunday school teachers,
Why don't you sit down?
Sunday school
Oh,
orchestra, youth fellowship counselor, member of the church rebuilding committee, church camp counselor. Well, then that's why you're so young.
That's
right. You kept busy.
And my husband, God bless him, he said to me, honey, he said, why don't you take your trunk right up to the church and stay? Because he said you're up there most of your time anyway.
And even today, you're very active in your church.
Yes, I am.
Yes, you are.
Claudia, as someone who's been around, and you know, Jerry, this is an interesting. Maybe is Claudia the oldest citizen right now in Mount Pleasant?
Well,
I'm 97.
97.
Anne just passed.
Anne just passed, and she was 103.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know, but when you hit those late 90s, you got to be up at the top 2 or 3, I would think. If
We
not,
should really look at that.
Yeah.
You
Well, maybe
possibly-
the listeners, maybe who's ever
They
watching
could-
or listening
they
to the show
could
may
let the
say
borough-
there's somebody else. But you know, you may have that distinction of being the oldest living citizen in the borough right now.
And what's that going to do me?
Well,
you may get called for another job.
yeah.
Well, I could be a babysitter or something like that.
Well, number one, the distinction that you're still here, which is great. I mean, that's something that speaks for itself. But yeah, that could be something interesting. We don't know.
We'll have
find
to
out.
look into that.
Claudia, of all the time you spent in the Mount Pleasant borough, especially the stores, is there any funny stories that you can recall of being at the Grant and at the Freed stores, which were dealing with people, or is there anything that happened during those times that would be interesting that you can recall?
Actually, no. Everything went smooth, and we were just
Business as usual.
in business as usual. And
Can you remember any prices? I mean, everything's
Oh, yes.
interesting.
Oh, prices.
58 cents for 3 hours is one.
Oh,
But
yes.
can you remember any prices of some things?
oh
that,
yes, cashew nuts were 39 cents a pound.
Cashew nuts.
Yeah,
We had a machine in Grant store
Yeah,
that
put the money in, turned it.
yes,
Uh-huh.
we just did our own things right there.
Uh-huh.
And actually, everything was just very smooth. And you never had any of this business
No,
of,
yes.
of what we have in town now.
Oh,
Did
it's
you
Everything
sell
was
women's
in-
shoes at Freeze?
Bigger.
Did you sell women's shoes at
My
Freeze?
mother did after she had 10 years as a truant officer, and then she was called to work different places, and we had a shoe store in town.
Okay.
And she worked at the shoe store, yes, and she worked at Recusens. Had the big, where the National Bank, where the bank is now.
yeah, yes.
And that was all dressed in a men's store and a women's baby store, all right down the street.
And back in your day, then in the 30s and 40s, a lot of our business people owned the buildings.
They did.
And they didn't rent, they owned. And they raised their families here in Mount Pleasant.
Yes, they did.
They did live upstairs? On
Some
most
of
the
them
stores?
lived upstairs, and then some of them later, when the families got bigger, they bought homes.
Mhm.
You know, there was the Levisons.
It was
and
always family. The stores
Yeah.
were family owned. Most
saloons,
and Gaddis's.
Gaddis's. These,
Well, there was a lot of department stores. I call
Oh,
them
yeah.
department
We
stores,
did
but they're
have-
retail stores, I guess, would use it.
Yes.
mhm,
A lot of them.
There
huh?
was Simon's store,
Simon's, yeah.
and there was
Cernudo's had a store on Main
yes,
Street.
and Levinson's.
Levison's, yeah. So, you know, there were a lot of, that's
and we
what
were
made
a busy
Main Street.
community. On
Oh,
Saturday
yeah.
evenings, you couldn't find a place to park.
Uh-uh.
It was
Uh,
people just were coming.
And on the weekends, the people from the mountain would come into
Yes,
town.
it would. Saturday evening
You know.
was.
Just overwhelming.
It
huh?
was.
Yeah.
It really
Was there a lot of special events that happened in town? Was there still a lot of parades back then?
We had parades, yes, and we had the firemen's band. It was active then, and we had Decoration Day service, and we had a Christmas parade, and we had.
Easter egg hunt was
Oh,
always
there
a
was
big
always the
thing.
Easter egg hunt at the fire hall and so forth.
Uh-huh.
Well, a lot of those traditions still continue,
Yes, yes,
Yes,
they
they
do.
which is
started-
Yes, they
interesting,
do.
especially the band.
Which is wonderful.
Our band, I know, is. I think
How's the band now?
the band has still about 21 active members.
That's a lot, Jerry.
Oh, yeah, it is. The problem we have is why you didn't want to work on Saturdays when we were talking. That was the only day she didn't like to work, was Saturdays, and I could see it.
Well, Sundays
Saturday
you,
evening.
and
Saturday
Sundays you
evenings.
didn't work.
And then
Yeah.
we
Because
didn't.
nobody was open
no
on
one
Sundays.
was open.
No one was working on Sunday.
But the band, they can parade if it's on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. But when it comes to the weekend, it's hard to keep the band together because everyone has somewhere to go. You know.
Then we had a girls' band.
Yeah, I didn't realize that.
Yes, we did. Our headquarters were down at the hall down below on Main Street. What's the club
Where the
down
VFW is
there?
now.
Yes.
Okay,
They were our sponsors more or less.
Did you play in the band?
Oh yes, I did. I played clarinet in the high school band.
No.
I was in the high school band too.
Boy.
Now, what did the girls' band? Did they perform at weddings and things like
No,
that? I'm sorry,
no.
not weddings. I mean parades.
Yes. We were at all parades, and we went to certain ones, just fairly local.
Local,
nothing
yeah.
local.
I've never heard of a girls' band.
Yeah.
Was that the only one around the
Yeah.
area?
Yes, yes. And Wilbur Boyer was our director of it. And we were in, I would say, 15 years after.
No,
Cool.
Wilbur Boyer, was he the one that had the glass or the ice house?
Wilbur. No, that was his brother.
Okay.
My father-in-law and Mr. Boyer Bob Boyer that just
Bob,
passed
yes,
away.
yes.
It's his daddy was
Yes.
at the ice house then.
Because he played in the band,
Yes.
and Bob played in the band, and Bob's son plays in the
That's right.
band.
That's right. They
So
all played in the
3
fireman's
generations.
band.
Yeah. 3 generations. Now, I want you to tell us the story about the Pittsburgh Steelers when they used to practice here in town.
Well, we have about 5 minutes, so you
Okay,
put it in.
5 minutes.
She'll get
Well,
it
you
in.
know the football. Yeah,
Falcons Field?
was Falcons Field,
Uh-huh.
and so they would come up one block out here
St. Clair Street.
and come out Vine Street, and that Mount Pleasant, and our lawn, my lawn, and the grape arbor was just so. Well, it just made them want to relax, so they just came down and they just flocked in the yard, and. We had lots of fun. Mother had always cold drinks for them, and when the grapes were ripe, well, they were there, and they just came and relaxed from their day of rehearsal and from their walking from the Falcons up here, and then they went up to the National Hotel, and that's where they stayed.
So you got to know any of them?
Oh, yes, I
over the
did,
years?
and I'm trying to think of the one gentleman that sort of had a little case on me.
Oh, well, there you go, folks.
But I can't think of his name. And he was
Did
the
your mother know?
quarterback.
Did your mother know? Well, then he was a star probably if he was a quarterback.
He was a quarterback.
Did your mother know about that?
Oh, yes,
Did
she
she?
was here, and she had the lemonade and everything. she knew there was nothing going to come of it
Yeah.
because I was intelligent enough to know that.
They come and go.
That's right. And so
Yeah,
and
we were
I-
too
I
busy
wasn't
working.
available.
Well, you were too busy working all these jobs. Well, Claudia, is there anything? Is there something we might have missed that you want to talk about? We have a couple minutes left. Is there anything that you feel that we you want to
Not
let
that I
everybody
know
know
of,
about
but you want to just go. No, this is just all my stuff.
Oh,
This is
the
all.
history.
Yes,
Well, you've seen a lot of changes over the years, Claudia, haven't you?
There have been a lot of changes, but we're still a little old-fashioned town.
Are you comfortable with the way our town is right now?
Yes.
Good, good. I know your church congregation is very supportive of Mount Pleasant.
Well, I'm glad.
And, I mean, the town clock.
Yes, yes.
Is it your church?
But you know, there's something that we need right now, and that's the alley between, and also the alley going up behind our church.
Yes,
It's very bad for people who have to use
Walkers.
the walkers.
walkers and so forth because the street is terrible.
And
and
on
it-
the side, that's the old brick alley.
Yes, that's
Okay,
it.
yes.
That's what it is.
We'll put that on the
And then
agenda.
if the alley coming up from College Avenue,
Uh-huh.
right behind the church,
Yes.
and yes, that is bad.
Yeah, they've taken some buildings down there and did
Yes.
some that made the alley a little
Yes.
rougher. Yes.
Well, Claudia, as always, I mean, even the first time we had talked to you years ago about the Steelers, also, as always, you're very interesting, and Jerry's right. You still have a great mind for '97. So
Yeah, I'm sort of bad. I'm ashamed that I can't remember the name of the quarterback.
well,
of the
we can't remember the name of the quarterback either. So don't worry about that. But you're a pleasant, nice person to talk to, and I want to thank you for being on the show.
Thank you very much.
And,
thank you.
Claudia,
Thank you.
We're
I
gonna,
knew we would have a good show with you.
and we're gonna do it. Listen,
Bless your
when you
back.
hit 100,
Bless
Claudia,
all three of you.
when you hit 100, we're gonna have another show.
All
Okay.
right, that sounds good.
So for Jerry, Claudia, and Jeff, this is Mount Pleasant Up Close, and we'll see you next time.